I don't want to be alone. I long to be in the temple. We must wind our way back home, and we can be in the temple. Let's all go to the temple.
Well, hello. Welcome to day 2 in the temple. We are live from the chaos. Alfie and August are appearing in the background. They may well be in the foreground before long. Billie, how are you? Are you also
I'm
being
very good.
invaded by 7-year-olds?
I'm not actually. Yeah, it's lovely to be back. It feels very quick, you know, and that's part of the whole rhythm, I think, of the week. You know, is days go by and they're quite quick. You know, especially this is quite an experiment, really, isn't it? Sort of having the same time each day, and it's good because it puts me back to where I was when I started the Temple Facebook group in May 2020, and I suddenly realised, oh my gosh, what is this beast I've created? I have to keep, you know, feeding the beast.
Because you kind of created. So you should say something about this Facebook group. So you'd already started writing the songs, and you'd started working with this 7-day framework of the week. And the next thing you did was to invite people in.
This is so fitting. It's lovely. And also today's colour is blue. And August, you're wearing blue.
August, you've dressed for the occasion. Well done.
Very good. Today is also throat chakra. So it's very much about communication. So yes, I've been trying to warm up a little bit this morning with the voice. And yeah, what was I going to say? So when in this country, in the UK, when lockdown first happened, that Monday, it just sort of cemented itself. Like it told me that it was the beginning of a large version of the temple cycle. So my feeling about that very, very first Monday was that was like a sort of a kind of horrific sort of triple Monday, if you like. So it's sort of coming out of that kind of template, you know, that was kind of placed on that event, and then the weeks that unfolded after that. The first period for me was a 7-week sort of honouring of the functions, you know, and of the days of the week. But instead of having days, I was actually doing weeks as well. So I had, you know, a washing day, but I also had the first week of that 7 weeks as the washing week. And I suppose, you know, from a descriptive point of view, I suppose what occurred to me is like we have been washed into this trauma. You know, we have been washed into, you know, this horrific situation. So, like after those 7 weeks, which was a very personal thing, I didn't tell anybody else about it apart from these animals, these virtual animals that were seen to like cavort around my parents' house, which were using Google AR. And they were almost like familiars. They were magical familiars, you know. So every day I'd have a different animal that would, you know, I'd speak to and it would speak to me.
We really need to
And
work out how to invite these animals
I'm
to
not
join us
hearing
on.
that.
We need to work out how to invite these
I know
animals
I
to join us on the
do.
live
I
stream
do.
over the rest of the week.
Oh, I'm loving this wildness. This is wonderful. Today is all about wildness in the temple calendar.
Today's all about what? Sorry.
Wildness. So the animal for Tuesday was the tiger, or is the tiger.
The tiger. Guys, the tiger died. Can you go and find us a tiger?
Wow.
Alice, can do, yeah,
What is
perfect.
that?
Then tiger.
Seeing a blue ball there. Cheeky close-ups. Wonderful. So yes, like yesterday, you mentioned about this sort of mystery cycle, and I guess at that time when it was all about how are we getting through this together? Nobody can see each other in the same room. There was this. I sort of had this sense where it was sort of. It felt interesting to me to put things out into the world that were mysterious, rather than things which were saying, "Oh, aren't we having a terrible time?" And I suppose that sort of centres how art was an absolute lifeline, like for so many people, in deepest lockdown. Everything's frozen now for me. I can't actually. I'm seeing a still frame. Oh.
Okay,
Oh.
I'm still hearing you. We'll see. Maybe this
I
is
just
all
don't know
going
whether
out
I'm going to
on
keep speaking.
YouTube.
Feel like
Maybe
I'm
this is all.
speaking to a painting now.
I think. Do you know what I
I'm
think
going
we
to
should
stop
do,
speaking.
Billy?
Maybe you are actually speaking, Doodles.
Are you hearing me? I think we should put today's track on. So I'm
hearing you and I'm not seeing you, but yes. Oh, there's the tiger.
Oh, the tiger has arrived. There's a tiger in the house. What's the tiger's name, Billy?
The tiger's name is Katru.
Cutthroat.
Which is actually named. No. It's KHATRU. And it's named after a track by Yes, which is called Siberian Cat Food.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can put some music on and we can have a listen to today's track, what's today's track called?
So this is Ironing Days, and Viv Goodwin Dark, who we spoke about yesterday, sings lead vocal, and we wrote the song together.
Okay. Here we go then, Ironing Days.
On the day that follows yesterday's tomorrows, ironing away to straighten out these things. Knew there would be creases in time. I'm not in pieces, I'm just ironing away to straighten these things out. Always folding silk and linen seams, and our long forgotten dreams. Presumed a strong foundation, but there was devastation. Ironing days set in our way.
Well, here we are. That was ironing days. We're in a slightly calmer environment than we were before before that track. There's now a herd of thundering elephants above my head, but I evicted them from the room so that I could hear myself think.
Brilliant.
Is this all very appropriate to the spirit of Ironing Day by any chance, Billy?
It's really, really appropriate, Dougal. Yeah, so I think it's worth saying that, you know, there was something that was set in motion actually before this album, which was The Other Place that we did. And I remember we spoke a lot about repetition in the run up to that. Because if this is a ritual in time, that was a sort of ritual in space, you know, where we went to 7 different locations for 7 days, you know, from Devon to Westminster, asking people about power. And I remember there was something that you sent me about repetition, about the mantra, and it was something to do with reaching another level, like through the repetition, and other things come out of that. And so, you know, there is a sense in which the temple is like a kind of technology, and in many ways the album is like what has been made through using that technology rather than being the technology itself, if that makes sense. So once we reached this new 7 weeks where I realized I had to let other people into this world, and, you know, it's not this private Facebook group, I suppose the kind of pressing, like no pun in, well, every pun intended actually, the pressing issue, you know, at that moment was Black Lives Matter, and like essentially
Which is there in the lyrics of that song.
Which is there, exactly,
when the statues fell.
exactly. And what started with, you know, using the iron and feeling the responsibility of having to iron, you know, the garments, you know, of my mom, who I was caring for back at the beginning of 2020. That responsibility of she is entrusting me with, you know, with her, you know, something very delicate, and I actually have a lot of power here, you know. That sort of came to the fore again in like a different kind of with a different kind of spin, you know, in when it came to, you know, there's that lyric about when the statue fell, you know, and my interpretation at that point was, you know, this is the kind of grappling of the enormous weight, you know, that we've lived under, you know, the results of colonialization, and so I suppose that's the theme which then kind of embedded itself not just into this, you know, this kind of part of that year we were living, but also embedded itself into, you know, into every Tuesday for me, you know. So there is that sense in which it's the calendar is, it sort of feels linear when we do it sort of day by day in 1 week, but the more we do it, the more it turns into a kind of spiral effect. And I remember sort of back in the beginning of 2020, you and I talking about cycles and how that also works in friendships as well. You know, how you sort of keep going round somehow, and there are times in that circle where you don't see each other, or you don't kind of quite connect, and then it sort of comes back, and it's like, oh, we're here again, you know. Anyway, I've covered so many things there, and I suppose the basic answer to it is that you know, ironing is about grappling with our wild spirit, as you know, as humans stroke animals, and there's a lot, you know, there's a lot in there.
Well, there's certainly, yeah, it certainly is. One of the elements within that that echoed for me from something we were talking about yesterday was this.
Mm.
Um, we we spoke yesterday about boredom, and I think that one of the conversations about repetition that we were having in 2015 when you and Martine were making the journey from Devon to Westminster was um, about like getting out the far side of boredom. That
Yes.
one of the things that repetition can be about is you repeat something so many times that first you get bored of it, and then second you sort of beat the boredom, like you win over boredom by keeping going, and something else opens up on that space, on that
Mm.
site of repetition.
Yeah, definitely that, and of course for me, that connects so easily to music and the song, and I suppose as much as I've always been drawn to like meditation and I suppose that kind of um, expression or worship, for want of a better word, but anyway, the main way that I first really experienced what that could mean was sitting at home pre-sequencer recording a part that I knew had to repeat, and I'd have to do it onto full track tape for like 10 minutes because I didn't know how long I wanted the track to be. And I remember experiencing exactly that, experiencing I've got to be careful, I've got to, I'm feeling it, but I've got to stay at the same tempo. And, a minute in, you sort of think, oh, wow, you realize, what you've, what you've taken on, but by the sixth minute, you're hallucinating. It's beautiful.
Well, this is why
And I suppose,
drumming.
there's something shamanic there, isn't there? Obviously.
That's exactly what I was about to say. This is why drumming is
Yeah.
so associated with altering states of consciousness and bringing consciousness into alignment. And it's interesting because as I'm saying that, I'm thinking of Ansaman Biswas, who was part of the group doing the first Homeward Bound series with us 3 years ago, around the time that you were working on these songs, who is
Yes.
among many different things an extraordinary percussionist and an artist who often works with scientists. And I remember
He's the
listening to
magic
him.
carpet fly, isn't he?
That's right. He's the guy who flew the magic
Yeah.
carpet in the Soviet cosmonauts training program with his mate Jem Feiner from who's a major artist in his own right, and also I think was the bass player in the Pogues. And I remember Ansaman talking about this research where they were doing like heart scans on people while there's kind of drumming and rhythm taking place. And so it's, on the one hand, there's a thing around altered consciousness and consciousness coming into alignment. On the other hand, or maybe it's just the same thing, the rhythms of the body are coming into alignment between people as you're experiencing that together. So, repetition is very far from just boring. And maybe music is one of the places where that's most obvious because so much music is based on the power of repetition.
Yeah, very much. I remember because after that initial phase, I came to live with Viv, and in many ways, I sort of think of Tuesday as being her day as well. Just because in my own particular story, that was the second landing place after the beginning of lockdown, essentially. But I remember, like, possibly a month or two before I came to live here, which is not where I live generally, but it's where I'm living at the moment, just for a week or two before we go on to it. I remember her saying, I've got the gist of this now. What else is there? And I remember thinking, that is a very good point. And also, you know, why do people communicate? They don't just communicate for ideas, they communicate for feelings. And I think what I was feeling strongly from Viv at that point was like, I'm feeling, I suppose, expressing what a lot of people felt at that point. I'm in prison here, you know? And I think it's worth saying, you know, if the temple is to be understood as in a sort of dogmatic way, I think maybe what we often associate with religion, you know, it doesn't work. You know, it doesn't work if you think that, you know, what's being proposed is like a very rigid system. It's not. And I suppose that's where I sort of think, well, I'm coming back to not just it being a piece of music, but also it being jazz. You know, it being that there's these set points that we improvise around, which is kind of what we're doing right now.
Well, I'm thinking about, you know, the way that modernity has often thought of, you know, if something's become a ritual, that it's sort of hollowed out through repetition, stuck, rigid,
Yes.
which, you know, which maybe echoes with something you said yesterday about your evolving understanding of relationship to tradition, and how where some of the material from this album was coming from was a re-evaluation on your part of the value of the past and the ways that people have done things in other times and places, rather than the past simply as something to escape and tradition as something to escape from. And in the same way, I mean, I think it's St. Benedict who created the sort of the structure of monastic life, the order of monastic life, who talked about it as a trellis, you know, the sort of framework on which plants can grow, which is very much an image for an image for improvisation, the sort of necessary simple structure which allows a flourishing to take place. I mean, the 12-bar blues is a trellis on which a kind of infinite variety of flourishing can take place. And I'm sure you could think of all sorts of other musical examples that would help us flesh that out. But this maybe again gets us into this idea that what might look on the surface like repetition or rigidity can actually be the conditions of possibility for improvisation and flourishing, rather than something antithetical to them.
Yes. I remember when I had the pleasure of working with the most amazing flautist who, you know, inspired a lot of my work, inspired Viv's playing as well, Jimmy Hastings, who played with Caravan, and he was always the sort of older uncle of the band who'd come in and do his amazing solos without moving. You know, it just comes out like you almost think, where is this being expressed from? Because it's not the place that, you know, most guitarists who are posing sort of express from, you know what I mean? And yeah, like of the many things he sort of said to me when he, you know, did a recording session with me and even bought me lunch, lovely guy. He said that he treats the rehearsal as if it's a performance, and the performance as if it's a rehearsal. And I felt like there was a lot in there, you know, and I suppose the definition of those terms is sort of based on his classical upbringing, and how the rehearsal is sort of a bit like, oh, you know, it's we're just finding our way. And he was like, no, I'm going to pretend that I know exactly what I'm doing in the rehearsal, because then when it comes to the performance, I can be completely free, you know. And that's really stayed with me. And Roz in the band, who I haven't mentioned yet, Roz Harding, who plays alto sax and also tenor recorder and sings on the album as well, who's a, you know, really good friend, and we've been working together for 12 or 13 years, you know. She she is probably one of the most free people that I know, and that covers, avant-garde jazz, but it also covers just playfulness. But she also swears by knowing exactly what she's doing, having a very, very set. And I suppose I mean the practicalities, like when am I arriving? What's happening? When do I need to be there? All of those things. And I've met a lot of, like, particularly rock musicians who they kind of don't really care about that stuff, and you're lucky if they turn up. And I don't know, maybe Roz is somehow freer than those people, if you know what I mean.
There's something about knowing what the conditions of possibility of your ability to create freely are. It's almost like what happens in theatre in the relationship between the producer and the director, where I always think of it as, it's a non-hierarchical relationship. It's a partnership where the producer's job is to handle all of the interfaces to the outside world in such a way as to create this special zone, the room, within which the director can have their whole attention on what is happening in the room, on manifesting the work with the others who they are working with. And maybe that's a kind of idealized thing for me, because I've only ever worked off to the side rather than actually being a theatre maker myself. But I think that's a very kind of concrete example of something that's actually there in all sorts of creative practices when we look at them, which is, and I mean, the same thing applies to form. The form of the sonnet is a constriction that makes a flourishing of creativity possible. But if one had a sort of naive understanding of what freedom is or needs to be, you could go, but the sonnet is a prison for words, or like any form that imposes constraints in that way. It's necessary to have a more nuanced understanding, let's say, of what it is that allows us to bring something through.
Yes. I mean, in a way, it's what's my motivation, isn't it? And I when I was at university, I started. I had the audacity of starting an improvisation society. Yeah, I suppose it was actually a society in the sort of collegiate sense, But I sort of, back in the early noughties, I sort of had this. It was a huge, huge learning curve for me, because I think I just expected that people would come into a room, they'd know what improvisation was as a sort of abstract thing, and they would enter that zone, And what I actually was confronted with was many more people than I was expecting, but people who were much more sort of in a classical vein, hadn't improvised at all, and actually needed some structure, some structure to get free. And that was, I suppose that's when I realized that if I want to do this with other people, then there is a language that I have to learn and also write, So yeah, there's a sense in which the temple was all of that as well, I feel like you're reading a comment right now, are you?
Well, I'm not. I'm just sitting here and thinking we should say hi to folks who are watching along. And please, if you do have questions or comments, or you just want to say hello, then say hi to us in the chat. We're on day 2 of a week in the temple. It's been splendidly chaotic so far. I've been savaged by a tiger. We were invaded by 7-year-olds. And manhandled them out after letting them have their freedom for a while. We've got a few minutes left. Maybe it would be fun to just loop back to.
Did you say 2 minutes or 12 minutes?
I said a few. We've got about 12 minutes. 12 minutes left. Yeah, so we're all right. So. I thought it might be fun to just loop back around to this question of ironing and what exactly it is or means or implies in this structure. And I was thinking of um, the line from the poet, "Wherever I am folded, there I am a lie." This idea of like,
in the
bringing
body.
out the parts of ourselves that are kind of folded over, hidden, turned in on themselves, and bringing everything out into view. I'm wondering whether that's one of the resonances of ironing as a task and a process for you.
Definitely, because I suppose part of the knowing something is crumpled and needs attention is also knowing what it might be like to not be crumpled. So already there's something there about intention, I suppose, or maybe it's even romantic. The idea of, I mean, I couldn't possibly comment, but being completely straight, and yeah, like one of the things that we slightly touched upon, and I feel like I haven't really talked about yet. Well, I was just aware that yesterday when I talked about tradition, it was quite a wishy-washy term, and I think just going back to the kind of Black Lives Matter and all of that and the statue falling, I'm reminded of something you said in Homeward Bound about the idea of home sort of potentially being dangerous if it's something that's quite if it's a fortress, essentially. It's sort of there's a subtle place between, I have something warm around me where I can feel comfortable, but on the other hand, how high is my fence? I suppose it's also how long is my table, you know. So yeah, like there's a lot within ironing, I think, which is it's about responsibility, and it's about what are we choosing to carry forward as well. What does it mean to be straight? What does it mean to be uncrumpled?
I'm thinking of the phrase "at home in one's own skin," and that's part of what's at stake here. Is, you talked yesterday about how through these processes, this kind of rhythm or ritual, part of what you've created is almost a technology for feeling at home, for creating that sense of being at home. And then that being something that it's possible to share and something that's possible to invite others into. And, the home, this concept of home can be many, many different things. It can show up in many different ways. It's a bit like, we're sort of in the terrain of esoteric structures and models, I think, with the way that you're working with the week anyway. But if you think about the tree of life in Kabbalah, the sort of stations of or states of being and manifestation, the way that was first explained to me a long time ago by Mary Harrington was in terms of this idea of klipoth. And klipoth within Kabbalah is when something becomes its opposite by staying the same when it was time to change. It's the state of kind of hardening. It's the husk of the fruit. So each of these kind of stations or each of these kind of states of being on the tree of life are, they're all fruit, but there is a kind of dried out, rotten shadow version of each of them. So if the home as fruit is the place that is capable of offering hospitality, being a space of conviviality, the conditions, again, the conditions of possibility for something generous to happen, for something fruitful to happen, then the shadow version of that is the home that has become simply a kind of a space of exclusion, of fear, and of being defended against our fears, as if the things that we fear are, as if our fears are somewhere out there rather than actually, in us. And
Yeah,
so maybe the sort of
yeah,
the ironing, the getting out the folds and the creases, the bringing everything into the light, everything into view, is
yes,
also like bringing out the pockets of fear, the pockets of defensiveness within me, so that I
yes,
recognize them, like Prospero at the end of the Tempest, this thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine. It's not some alien other. It's actually
yes.
part of me that needs to be brought into the picture and invited to the table.
Which feels like the heart of the, decolonial kind of, pathway, really. What am I trying to say? Yeah, there was. You remember when we went to that festival, Future Perfect?
I do remember going to that festival, Future
The
Perfect.
second time. Yeah, there was this particular moment amongst our difficultating, and my memory of it is being somehow very far away from the person saying it, but the idea that everybody could hear it, everybody could hear this line, and the line was, we've spent too long trying to live ethically and thinking that the demon is out there. And actually, where we've got to now is that we are the us and the them. And, by that same token, we all have an inner Trump. And we wouldn't be capable of the hate that we wouldn't hate what we see if we didn't have it within ourselves. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. And yeah, there's more about this tomorrow, definitely.
Cool. Yeah, there's a thing that some of my friends who have been in AA or other 12-step fellowships talk about, where they're like, if you can see it, you are it. Like that thing that really annoys you when you recognize it in someone else, there is some correspondence to you, which is what hooks you
Yes.
in it. And
Yes.
like there's a habit, there's a kind of vernacular habit of reflexivity in those kinds of sayings that exist within a culture like AA that I like a lot, because it's not fancy or high flown. It's kind of hard won. It's born out of experience and out of trying to cultivate the habit of, whenever you feel yourself hooked by a kind of irritation or annoyance that is a form of attachment to someone else, to something other, just automatically looking for, what is it in me
Yes.
that makes
Yes.
that jump out, that makes that grab my attention, that makes that push my button, because there's something on the inside that thing that I'm reacting to as if it's out there corresponds to.
Yes. And I suppose that's probably potentially how we could interpret a lot of the negative response to Black Lives Matter, etc., is that there is a deep denial, and with the denial comes defensiveness. Um, I'm aware of the time now. I feel like I need to. I probably need to do this.
Well, we've got a couple of minutes left.
Yes.
So, what would you like? Yes, let me just put you on the screen.
Are we there? We are there. Yes. Here it is. One of many irons. Irons in the fire. Is it a mirror? Can you see yourself in the eye? I feel like today I'd like to really reflect on responsibility. This is a powerful device. We finished yesterday by talking about heat. How hot are we washing? I like to wash gently. We don't have a choice with this. There is a gauge on it, but it has to be pretty damn hot. The tiger, wildness, all of these things call us to examine those bits of ourselves which are not polite, which are not cultured, which are uncivilized. What is crumpled for you today, and what will you iron?
Thanks, Billy. There we are. I have no idea how well the tools have been holding up today. It feels like there's been quite a bit of lag at points along the way.
Yeah.
But we brought our own analog chaos as well. And we're here. We're going to do this every day. We're going to be in the temple for 45 minutes every afternoon this week with our cups of tea and our various implements, and with this wonderful music that you and the gang have created, Billy. And when we did the 7 days of it was the Don't Just Vote tour in the last week of that general election in 2015. We created this thing that was repetition and had a kind of ritual aspect to it. We didn't really know what was going to come out of that. I feel like I have very little idea what will come out of the practice of doing this each day this week. Good. It feels a long way away from, most of the work that I do. And I trust that in some way it will be fruitful and be a starting point for something else that we can't see from here. Yes. So thank you for letting me into the temple and joining me in it each day like this, Billy. It's really fun.
Thank you so much for bringing so much of yourself and time to all of this.
It's a total pleasure. See you tomorrow, Billy. See you tomorrow, everyone.
Manana banana.